Ladies and gentlemen, good day, and welcome to the AI for Good Summit webinar series. My name is Stefano Polidori from the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, and I have the privilege of introducing today's webinar. ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agencies for the ICT, and we are also the organizers of the AI for Good Global Summit, alongside the XPRIZE Foundation, in partnership with 38 UN sister agencies and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of the summit is to identify practical applications of AI and advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. We are pleased today to discuss AI policy standards and metrics for automated driving safety. Today's webinar is organized in partnership with the ITU Focus Group on AI for Autonomous and Assisted Driving. We have a distinguished set of panelists today, but as always, we're counting on you, the participants, to help create an engaging discussion. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sabli, Director of the ITU Telecommunications Standardization Bureau, to introduce the session. Over to you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you very much, Polidori. Colleagues and friends, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. I hope all you and your families in good health and good spirit. AI-based driving technologies. I think it's quite a new terminology now. AI-based driving technologies are expected to transform mobility radically over the coming decades. We have reached a point where we are confident in the safety of partial automation and described by SA Level 2. But the quest for more automation continues with the aims of improving road safety, helping commuters to make more productive use of their time, and achieving greater mobility for persons with disabilities and the elderly. Fully automated vehicles must help us to reduce around 1.3 million deaths and 25 million injuries that occur on our roads each year. This is the most crucial contribution automated vehicles could make to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But wide-scale acceptance and adoption of such autonomous driving face specific barriers, many of them associated with social concerns and resistance to change. There are also ethical issues to be considered as technologies in AI take on increasing responsibility for driver and pedestrian safety. So regulators are discussing innovative legal and regulatory frameworks, taking into account national policies. The new frameworks may encompass a new way of testing and licensing, along with approaches to data protection, security, and other liability issues. The further research is required in this domain to understand the factors influencing public acceptance of AI as a driver. In this regard, we are pleased to note the work of the European Commission to establish a policy framework for AI at the European level, and look forward to our work together to build a strong understanding of how this framework could impact future transport systems coupled with AI. Established in October 2019, ITU Focus Group on AI for Autonomous and Assisted Driving is developing a mechanism to assess the behavior of AI systems responsible for driving a vehicle. The aim is to establish a minimum performance threshold for AI systems in vehicles by the 1949 and the 1968 UN Conventions on Road Traffic. So as part of this focus group's activities, the model problem was formulated and studied to examine the ethical challenges faced by companies regarding their autonomous driving systems not being able to assure the elimination of all accidents. This problem is highly relevant to public expectations around the behavior of autonomous driving software during events leading to a collision. So at today's webinar, we will further explore the necessity for regulators to establish appropriate guidelines for the industry to test and deploy autonomous driving technologies in a safe manner. So our webinars provide valuable support to the work ongoing in ITU focus groups, and they are especially valuable in promoting international dialogue. So I saw this participation from the chairman of this focus group and the leadership teams. So I express again my gratitude to all of our moderators, speakers, and the participants. We are very much appreciative of your support. Thank you very much. I wish you most fruitful discussions. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for highlighting the importance to establish appropriate guidelines for the industry to test and deploy autonomous driving technologies in a safe manner. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start today's discussion, I'm pleased to provide you with some general information and housekeeping. Please note that all presentations are already available in the webpage of the focus group on AI for autonomous and assisted driving. Also, the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the webpage after the event. Please note that 2 chat boxes are available, only one of which is dedicated to the Q&A. So participants can submit their questions at any time by typing this question in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I would now like to call on Mr. Brian Balcombe, who serves as Chief Strategy Officer at XPRIZE, and who's also the founder of the Autonomous Driver Alliance and the chairman of the ITUT focus group on AI for autonomous and assisted driving, to moderate today's webinar. Brian, I'm very pleased to give you the floor. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Stefano. And thank you, Chaser, for joining the session this morning. It's been a long journey, nearly 2 years now, I think, for us to get to this point with the activity of the focus group. I think we now have globally 350 participants, and it's great to see a number of them attending today. And then we'll have our follow-on meeting at the same time tomorrow. And everyone on this call is obviously welcome to join that session as well. We do have a fantastic range of experts joining us today. It was really motivated, this session, by the European Commission's proposal for horizontal AI regulation and how that might impact the automotive sector, autonomous driving, type approval, and standards. So we have experts covering all of those topics. We'll first run a session for 2 hours. So from now, say 1 o'clock European time until 3 o'clock European time. And that will focus specifically on the European Commission's proposal, which is the first ever legal framework for AI. That will be presented by Tatiana, Salvatore and Gabriele from the European Commission, who are also the authors of that document. We'll then hear viewpoints from Kai from Stellantis on UNECE type approval and how the framework relates to that. Also views from ASEA from Marta and Patrick as well. So that first 2 hours will finish off with a discussion and debate, which I'll moderate. So anytime you have a question that comes up, as Stefano was saying, just use the Q&A function. Some of those we can answer offline, some of those we can then bring up at the end when we're having the debate. Following on from that, we'll have a short break, 10 minutes or so, and then come back and discuss standards that are relevant to the regulation of artificial intelligence on the roads. And we'll be joined by Amy from the AVSC, SAE AVSC, as well as Niels from ETSI. So again, they should be fascinating discussions, looking at metrics, looking at safety standards or data required in the event of accidents, also looking at communication capabilities, which I think is often forgotten in this debate that we have around automated mobility. We tend to forget the connected and cooperative elements to that, which are becoming incredibly important in the discussion. So I'm very pleased to have Niels join us to cover those areas as well. So I think without further ado, I think we can now move to the presentation from the European Commission. Tatiana, Salvatore, Gabriele, are you there? Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us today. I know we had a very interesting pre-call, so I'm fascinated to see your presentation.
Thank you for your kind introduction, and also a kind introduction by Dr. Lee, who actually very nicely set out the context where the starting point of our discussion. And I will try now to share the screen.
Perfect.
Yeah, just a second. Okay. Let's see. So I hope you see it now. Yes, just the last slide for some reason. Second. Okay. Is it okay like this, or I should put on a full mode? Or you see it like this, fine? I don't hear you.
I can see it like this. I'm not sure if everyone else can. Is it possible to go full screen?
Yes, it's a bit problematic because I have two screens and then it counts.
Okay.
But if it's okay, I'll keep it like this. If no objections, but if it's too bad for somebody, I'll switch to full screen.
And I think it's okay to stick like this.
Okay, very good. So hello everyone again, and today, as Brian introduced, we will present the Artificial Intelligence Act proposed by European Commission, and I'm together today with Gabriele Messina and Salvatore Scalzo, so our team on behalf of DG Connect, and thank you for this invitation for this webinar. And we are very happy to participate in this international exchange on the AI. And just to follow on what Dr. Lee had said, our starting point is that artificial intelligence systems are in general very beneficial if they're used in a trustworthy and human-centric way, because AI systems or AI technologies in general can help us to drive more sustainability, so more sustainable use of resources. It also can save lives and so on. And also, for example, in fighting COVID epidemics, we have also seen how digital technologies and AI specifically has been very beneficial. And we have many applications. Of course, this seminar is focused on the autonomous vehicles, but of course, the AI systems and applications of AI systems is much broader. So this is a bit of a context. And now we would like to present today, and I will do first the presentation of the artificial intelligence package proposed by Commission, and then together with my colleagues will be open for the questions and answers. I don't know why my view is jumping, but I hope you see still. So basically, we will take this presentation in 3 steps. So following the short introduction, I will focus mostly on the proposal for an Artificial Intelligence Act, then briefly outline also the coordinated plan on AI, which is part of the AI package, and then we briefly discuss the next steps. Just before we dive into the topic, I just want to say that our presentation, or this presentation, will mostly focus on the horizontal issues. So I will only briefly discuss. I will briefly discuss only the interrelationship with automotive sector, but of course I will try to cover. But you're very welcome in the Q&A sessions to ask more specific questions. So now, if I move to the next point, just also because we have audience which is outside of European Union as well, Just this slide actually provides an outline just to kind of remind that actually regulation of artificial intelligence in the context of European Union, it's already on policy agenda since 2015. So between 2015 and 21, there was a number of discussions and preparatory actions which involved a lot of stakeholders, and which led to this actually publication of this artificial intelligence package. So this is not something which comes out of blue, which is something which have been discussed in European Union level already quite intensively for some years. And of course, with parallel discussions, similar discussions are taking place also in the context of Council of Europe at the UN level and so on. But this is just to remind us that what we will present today and discuss today from the proposal of European Union is based on very broad discussions with a variety of stakeholders. And this is kind of very much a process which based on a lot of involvement. And specifically, if we speak about European Union level, in 2018, European Union adopted the first strategy on artificial intelligence, which actually set up the first vision or guidelines how we see this technology to be developed and what is the European stake on this. And the most important or the most, let's say, strategic document which was published before 21 artificial intelligence package was the white paper on artificial intelligence. So this was a strategic paper which outlined Commission vision, general approach to artificial intelligence, but also outlined a number of measures which a European Commission will adopt in order to take the full benefit of artificial intelligence technologies, and also in order to enhance global competitiveness of European Union. And particularly with 2020 white paper on artificial intelligence has set out the vision of European Union, which states that in order to develop artificial intelligence and to uptake artificial intelligence technologies, European Union stands for the vision which is based on the ecosystem of excellence and trust. And this is also what Dr. Lee has mentioned in his introductory remarks, because it doesn't matter how excellent, technically speaking, systems can be, without trust, this will not lead to wide societal uptake. Therefore, the Commission's view is that ecosystem of excellence is important, and we need further to invest into this and develop this, but we also need ecosystem of trust, which will help us to enable these technologies to be widely accepted and trusted by people. So all of this preparatory work, and this was at horizontal level. Also, there was a lot of preparatory work specifically in relation to automotive sector. So, for example, as some of you may know, that there is a work on the cooperative, connected, and automated mobility platform. There is an upcoming partnership on also CCM. As well as in the specifically related to road transport, there was a recent report by the European Commission expert group on ethics of connected and automated vehicles, which provided certain recommendations on road safety, privacy, fairness, explainability, and responsibility. So all of these had one or another way fed into the preparation of 2021 European Artificial Intelligence Package, which was announced by the Commission on 21st of April 21. So as I mentioned, this package has two key, let's say, driving forces. So ecosystem of excellence and ecosystem of trust. And in order to operationalize this kind of notion of ecosystem of excellence and ecosystem of trust, in 2021 AI package, we have three key documents. And so the communication fostering European approach to AI, it's like a political document which sets the kind of ambition and vision, but more, let's say, down-to-earth operational documents are coordinated plan on AI, which operationalizes Commission or European Union vision on the ecosystem of excellence, and the proposal for a legal framework on artificial intelligence, which focuses on the ecosystem of trust. And why I take a lot of time to remind it, because that's actually how EU vision stands it's a strong European vision stronghold, this ecosystem of excellence and trust. And we really believe that these two elements need to move together in order to succeed both in the European Union, but also in the global arena. So now I move more into and zoom in more into the exact proposal for a legal framework. So why do we need another horizontal regulation, and why do we need altogether regulation on artificial intelligence? We have studied this question quite intensively. We also asked people, so there was a public consultation which has very big response rate. So we received a lot of contributions by industry, by civil society organizations, by individuals. And basically the key motive of these results of a public consultation was that indeed we need to regulate certain risks related to AI. Said that, we don't start from zero. There is already a solid framework of EU legislation already in place, both at the EU, at the national level. For example, some of you might know the General Data Protection Regulation. There are also specific legislation, of course, for automotive sector and so on. So we already have a lot of legislation which aims to protect safety of individuals, which also aims to protect fundamental rights of individuals. So it is well established and well-functioning system of law. However, certain specific features of artificial intelligence, which you see above, so complexity, opacity, and predictability, autonomy, and data-drivenness, can make application and enforcement of the existing rules more challenging. And they can, in these gray areas in the existing legislation, can generate risks to safety and fundamental rights. So our focus is exactly on these specific characteristics of 5 specific features of artificial intelligence. And that's what we propose in this horizontal legislation to look at. So we don't overhaul the all product safety legislation. We just look at the specific characteristics of AI, which create specific risks related to specific AI systems. So with this context, we felt that exactly these specific characteristics are not fully addressed in the current legislation. So the current legislation needs to be complemented in order to be able to address the specific characteristics. For that, we need a tailored regulatory response, and that's what is the Artificial Intelligence Act proposal aims to do. Now, before you still fresh with attention, this slide provides the main synopsis of what is Artificial Intelligence Act all about. So the 3 main elements and the overall model. So if you remember this slide, you at least know the main elements before I go into details of the Artificial Intelligence Act. First of all, it's a horizontal legislation. So it means that it applies to all AI systems which fall into the scope, irrespective of the sector. Yeah. So it is both for medical applications or justice and home affairs AI systems, or AI systems used in the courts, etc. So, or let it be autonomous vehicles. So it applies horizontally, and it's very important that in logic of this legislation follows the new legislative framework model. And I will explain a bit later what does it mean. But just for now, to remember that it's a horizontal act. So the requirements and the setup in this legislation applies across the board. Then if we look at the specific, let's say, main elements, so it's not exhaustive list of everything what is covered in proposal for Artificial Intelligence Acts, but 3 main elements are. But first of all, this legislation defines what AI system is. And as you may know, this is very, very contested, but for the purpose of regulation, we had to make a decision. And this proposal makes a proposal how we can define AI system. Then secondly, this proposal defines what AI system, or specifically what AI use cases and under what conditions can be put on the EU market or used at on the EU market, or altogether banned from EU. So it establishes this kind of the framework which clearly explains, which is also very helpful both for users but also for providers, of what AI use cases are allowed and under what conditions, and if they fall into special categories, what rules we need to follow. So it established these holistic systems of which applies to the AI kind of systems ecosystem. And then this specific focus of this regulation is on the high-risk AI systems. So for high-risk AI systems, this regulation provides quite detailed rules on the requirements, on the governance systems, on conformity assessment procedures, and so on. And I come back to this, but this is maybe just a snapshot of what this regulation all about. Now, also, in order to understand this 80+ pages regulation, maybe I'll just provide 5 elements which help to explain the overall logic and the build-up of the whole system. I think it's very useful before we dig into the specific elements, so you understand what is the nature of the BIST and what was the intention. So first of all, we wanted this regulation to support innovation and provide legal certainty, both for businesses and for the citizens. So, so we wanted to support innovation and provide clarity exactly by setting out how the existing might be gray areas in the existing legislation would be regulated and specifically application to AI systems. Also, in order to support regulatory continuity, we try to integrate as much as possible the proposed framework with the existing EU legislation. That's why I started in the previous slide explaining that we take into consideration and we aim to build up on what already exists at the EU level. Then another thing which for us was very important was to build a legislative proposal which is future-proof. And we integrated a number of future-proof elements in the system, for example, as 2-step classification of the high-risk use cases and definition of artificial intelligence. And again, I will explain it a bit later. So also in terms of future-proof, we try to follow this new approach legislative logic, which basically says that we set the high-level requirements, which should be then operationalized through standards developed through private bodies. So we set the ambition, and then with the help of the standardization bodies, we operationalize it in more detail. So this is not, the proposed legislation is not technically nuanced set of very specific technical rules, but rather an ambition. And I believe that especially in the areas as artificial intelligence, this is essential. Then also, we don't want to ban or restrict or preclude in any way the development of the beneficial AI technologies. Therefore, we strongly believe that regulation of artificial intelligence systems across the board must be risk-based. So we don't regulate any technology as such, and this is very important. We want to concentrate on specific high-risk use cases. So we don't ban or cluster any specific sector per se as a high risk, but we look specifically at concrete use cases of AI systems. And in this risk-based approach, we don't address all possible kind of risks, but we cover risks related to health and safety and fundamental rights. So this is the focus of the legislation. Fourth, I think especially important for this forum, but we also want to establish the level playing field for EU and non-EU players. So we don't distinguish between EU and non-EU players as long as provider of AI system fulfills the requirements set in the legislation. So it doesn't matter the origin of the producer or user. And this takes me to the next slide, and I guess the essence of the construction of the regulation is that it follows very much internal market legislation logic. So it's Article 114 of the treaty. So it is product legislation, which is for people in the automotive sector must be very familiar, but it, for example, is less familiar for people who are more working on software and data and so on. So the general logic, which would be very familiar to you, is treats AI system as a product and follows this product legislation logic. Now, if we now look into specific elements, like I said, one of the first and one of the critical contribution of this Artificial Intelligence Act is to set up or propose the definition of artificial intelligence. And we define artificial intelligence system in Article 3 as a software that is developed with one of the more of the techniques and approaches listed in Annex 1. And you can read, you see the definition is very general and has two elements. So in Article 3, we provide a general, let's say, concept, which further explain in Annex 1. And this is legislative technique exactly used in order to ensure that we can adapt this definition over time. So Article 3, it's a part of the legislation, but Annex 1, it's list the techniques. Yeah. So for example, machine learning. Yeah. But of course, we know that AI technology is developing very rapidly. Therefore, there could be new approaches and techniques which would fall into the AI, generally speaking. Therefore, we want to have a flexible instrument through Annex 1, where we could add, for example, other techniques which would emerge as part of AI technologies development. So in this broad definition in Article 3, you see that a lot of technologies will fall, and Annex 1 could be amended in the future if necessary to adjust to cover other technologies which are currently, for example, not listed. We tried in this definition to be as neutral as possible, and this definition is by and large is inspired by the debates at the OECD level. So this is very closely related to this OECD definition. So this is in terms of the definition. Now, if we look at the scope, what is covered, who is covered by this legislation, proposed legislation. So it covers both providers, so developers of AI systems, both public and private. It also covers users, so the natural or legal entities which use AI systems, both which are located within the union. And it also covers providers and users located in a third country where the output of AI system is used in the European Union. There are only two exceptions to this, so it's very broad coverage. So the AI proposal does not cover AI systems developed exclusively for military use. And it also does not cover public authorities in third countries who use AI system in a framework of international agreements. So it's again exception from the international law commitments of the European Union. Otherwise, all users and providers, public or private, which put into use or into service or use AI systems within the union are covered. So this takes me to the risk-based approach. So we have broad definition, we have broad scope, but now we zoom into what does the risk-based approach mean? It doesn't mean that everything which falls into the definition of AI system will fall necessary or will be subject to regulation. And this is what we would like to really highlight. Actually, most of the AI systems currently developed or in use will fall into the category of minimal or no risk, or into the transparency risk category, so in green and yellow area. So most of the AI systems will be only subject to to transparency obligations and not subject to any other additional rules beyond what already exists, for example, in the General Data Protection legislation directive. So, but of course, there are certain AI systems which fall into high risk or unacceptable risk, and that's where this legislation focuses. But this pyramid gives you an overview that we cover all different types of AI systems, but they are regulated in a different way. So this slide just provides a short run through of this green and yellow parts. So the AI systems which are minimal or no risk, or which are subject to transparency obligations. So in relation to minimal or no risk AI systems, there are no mandatory obligations, and we encourage industry to develop voluntary codes of conduct, for example. So for example, AI system which helps you to select your music preferences. It's definitely, we don't see it as an AI system which has high risk to your safety or fundamental rights. So no mandatory additional obligations. For certain AI systems which may be not high risk, but they still interact with individuals, we believe that individuals, so human beings, natural persons, should be notified. And this is provided in Article 52. There are 3 specific cases which we spell out, which fall under the transparency obligations. So when humans interact with an AI system, unless it's evident, so if you speak to a chatbot, for example, then we also ask for specific transparency. So in terms of notification of humans, if they are exposed to emotional recognition or biometric categorization systems, or if these concerns deep fakes. And just as a footnote, there is specific regulation which relates to biometric AI biometric systems, which I will come briefly there, where it's not only falls into transparency obligations category, but also into the category of high risk or even prohibited use. But in generally, this is to remember that everything which is not part of high risk or prohibited categories will be in one of these 2 categories. So either no mandatory obligations or transparency obligations. Now we move to the most interesting part, the high risk AI systems. And traditional vehicles, so automotive sector, will be concerned by this high risk AI system. Paragraphs. So just here to explain the build-up of the overall approach to regulation, we, in definition of high-risk AI systems, have 2 broad categories. One is a category which we call safety components of regulated products. So this is the AI systems which are already part safety component of the product, which is already regulated on the EU level. So for example, vehicles. Which are already subject to third-party conformity assessment, third-party assessment procedure. So there is already sectoral legislation, be it on aviation, on medical devices, machinery, or vehicles, which is already regulated at the EU level. So if AI system is a part of a safety component of these regulated products, then it is high risk. The second broad category are the AI systems which are not yet specifically regulated by product safety legislation, but which are nevertheless, we feel that could have specific use cases which might be high risk. And here we have 8 broad areas. Here it's important to mention that within these broad areas, we identify in annexes the specific use cases. So not the whole category of management and operation of critical infrastructure, for example, road infrastructure would fall into this category, but specific use cases. So this is the 2, let's say, 2 levels built up. So on one hand, we have AI systems which are already regulated as part of the safety, or AI or products which potentially could have AI components which are already regulated by EU legislation. And then we have also the AI systems which are not yet regulated. Within the first category, which is very important for automotive sector, we have 2 categories of legislation. So first is so-called new legislative framework legislation. This, for example, belongs to medical devices. It means that it's a legislation which follows the logic that which is the following. So you set up just the high-level requirements, and then these requirements are operationalized for specific implementing legislation or standards in the future. But the general idea is that this legislation sets up the kind of aims, and then which could be then further detailed. And another important element of this new approach legislation, that it is complementary to other legislations. So you can, for example, have medical devices regulation, which could simultaneously take into consideration the requirements from radio equipment directive and so on. So it's complementary. The old approach legislation, which, for example, most of the mobility sector covers, it follows so-called old approach legislation to setting up requirements, which is very technically detailed. So the legislation itself is already provide technical details. And the second element of this, that it does not allow for this kind of add-on complementarity. Therefore, in our proposal, we treat this new and old approach legislation differently. That's why in the annex, you have a list of legislation in Annex 2, which is divided in category A and B. So A is the regulated products which follow new approach legislation, while category B is so-called old approach legislation. Now, if the product is falls into one of these categories, so either into the list of legislation listed in Annex 2, or it falls into the category of one of the 8 areas listed in here, as you see on the slide, and which are further detailed in Annex 3, then you're automatically in the high risk category. So if AI system is in the high risk category, then the certain requirements apply. So, and this is provided in Article 8, which says that the high-risk AI system shall comply with the requirements established in this regulation, so in this legislation. And what are these requirements? So these are the 5 requirements which are listed in Article 10 to 15. So training, validation, and testing data requirement. Then we have documentation and login features requirement. Then we have transparency requirements and information provision and storing of information requirements, human oversight, and finally cybersecurity, robustness, and accuracy. So this is this 5 high-level requirements which all high-risk AI systems across all possible areas of application must fulfill. What is very essential also to understand these requirements are the notion of the intended purpose and also the risk management process. So, of course, all these 5 requirements, and again, this is something familiar for automotive sector, must be assessed and developed further in the light of the intended purpose of AI system. And this further specified for those who want to look in more detail what intended purpose of AI system means in Article 3. And this will be ultimately the yardstick for further providing operationalization of the requirements. Now, I come back a bit in more detail to explain about this new legislative framework and old legislative approach legislation, because it usually triggers a number of questions. As I mentioned before, so new legislative framework legislation, which is mostly not applicable to automotive sectors. After our regulation becomes a law, so after all the adoption process, the requirements and obligations, which I just showed you in the previous slides, will become directly applicable. So these requirements will become directly applicable to these systems which are regulated by new legislative framework legislation. However, for old approach legislation, which, for example, automotive vehicles fall under, we will need to have in order to link the requirements of the proposal with already existing legislation. Article 76, for example, provides that Regulation 167/213, which is on the 4 and 3 vehicles, vehicles, will have to take into account the requirements while implementing or revision of the sectoral legislation. So to put it simply, basically, then the Regulation 167/213 will be revised. The requirements which are set out in this AI legislation will have to be taken into account and integrated into the existing systems. However, everything which relates to conformity assessment procedures or surveillance and supervision will be as it is existing now. So basically, the difference with new legislative framework, but where it becomes automatically part of the sectoral, let's say, legislation, while in the old approach legislation, we would need this intermediary step, and then the sectoral legislation itself will be amended in order to take into consideration the requirements. So this, and the next slide provides an overview of the main obligations for the high-risk systems. So the obligations for providers, so developers and users. So as you see, again, it's quite familiar to the product safety legislation, so especially for automotive. And the next slide provides what would be the system for CE marking. Again, very familiar for product legislation. So yeah, you follow this kind of logic, but first you classify, if your product classifies as a high risk, you have to ensure already in design and development that you meet quality management and quality management systems, that you comply with AI regulations, so particularly 5 requirements, which I have just shown. Then you go through conformity assessment procedure. For automotive, it's the third-party conformity assessment procedure. And then if the system meets the requirements, including requirements of AI Act, then the system could have affixed the CE market to the system, and then the system can be placed on the market or put into service in the European Union. So this is the classical, let's say, chain of events. So the AI Act also covers both the pre-market conformity assessment process, but also post-market. So you see we have also a number of issues which will be linked to the post-market monitoring and reporting. And this provides another way to represent that what Artificial Intelligence Act covers is the whole life cycle of AI systems, from design to already use on the market, and incident reporting, and if necessary, the new conformity assessment if the product had been substantially modified. So this brings me to the end of the high-risk AI systems. I will only just briefly show you the red category, which is not of so much interest to this group, but you just know that it exists. So we have four categories of AI system use cases, which we think are unacceptable because they contravene EU values, and therefore we should be prohibited in the EU. So it's subliminal AI systems which lead to subliminal manipulation, which lead to exploitation of children or mentally disabled persons, with general purpose social scoring, and certain uses of remote biometric identification for law enforcement purposes in public accessible spaces. So these 4 categories, which are of AI use cases, AI system use cases, which will be prohibited in the European Union, or we propose them to be prohibited. There is specific provisions for regulation of remote biometric identification. It's quite complex, so those who are interested, please read it in detail. I will skip it for now. For certain remote biometric identification systems will fall under acceptable risk, while others will be in high risk plus transparency obligations. So this is a specific technology which we went into more detail into explaining nuances of that use. Just also now coming to the end, we also provide some measures to support innovation, and specifically SMEs and startups. So we provide for the system of so-called regulatory sandboxes, where the providers can experiment with and be kind of guided by national authorities in charge to see if the system complies with the established requirements and legislation. And this is provided in Article 53. And then we also provide certain measures which hopefully will support SMEs and startups. In terms of governance, just one word. Basically, the locus will be on national level. So existing national supervisory structures and authorities and conformity assessment bodies will be used as it's now, but we would just have additional, let's say, tasks to check specifically AI-related risks. At the European level, we will have just artificial intelligence boards, will be more like a overview instrument to coordinate and provide guidance to the national authorities. But we will not establish a new big, huge agency or body at the EU level tasked with this requirement. So the locus of the setup of the structure and the systems will be at the national level. This brings me to the almost end of my presentation. I just wanted to highlight that in addition to this regulation, we also Commission proposed coordinated plan on AI, which has specifically section on mobility. And this coordinated plan is an operational plan, let's say, a strategic vision between European Commission and all 27 EU member states. And in this coordinated plan, specifically, the actions for the next 2 to 5 years are outlined. So there you could see specific measures which EU will take up in the area of AI generally, but also specifically as relates to mobility sector. And this coordinated plan also provides what are the available funding instruments for Digital Europe program, Horizon Europe, or the money available for Recovery and Resilience Facility that could be used, and we explain how these different instruments can be used to support the actions identified in the coordinated plan. So as the last slide, just next steps. So now this Artificial Intelligence Act proposal proposed by Commission is with co-legislators, so European Parliament and the Council will negotiate the proposal and agree on a compromise. Once adopted, there will be 2 years of transitional period before regulation becomes applicable across the EU. And in parallel with this preparatory work and negotiations at the European Parliament and the Council, we're already starting a process of developing on standards. So we have starting a cooperation of SENS and ELEC, which just established yesterday joint technical committee to develop standards which will in the standards related to AI. So this is what is happening, and that's what the next steps. And thank you for your attention. And now we'll be happy, together with my colleagues, to take all the questions you might have. Thank you.
Hey, Tatiana, thank you very much. That's obviously it's a very comprehensive document. So thank you for giving us an overview of that. I think it's really interesting. I think what we'll actually do is follow on with Kai, if Kai's there, with the sort of UNECE perspective, just to give everyone on the call the context of how UNECE sort of global regulation for vehicles, automated vehicles, cybersecurity works. And then we'll follow on from that with the viewpoints from ASEA, which is specific about the framework that's been proposed. So thank you very much. We'll come back to you soon. So Kai, are you there?
Yes, so I will share my presentation.
And for the audience, any further questions that you want to put in the Q&A, please feel free to do so. Tatiana, you're free to respond to those in writing, or we can address those during the discussion and debate after we've seen the presentations from Kai and from Marta and Patrick. So Kai, yeah, we have your slides.
Okay, is it fine? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you well. So thank you very much.
Okay, good. So hello, I will present now the principles of use of artificial intelligence in motor vehicles and the regulation impacts for the automotive regulation in general. So the first point is the scope of my presentation. I will only refer to aspects which are covered by vehicle type approval. That's very important, I think, to clarify. So my presentation does not cover questions on experimentation of prototypes, so pure research work, and also the aspects of vehicles that are not part of type approval. That means data protection, privacy, chatbots, voice emission recognition, audio, video, entertainment. This is not part of the type approval, so this is excluded from my scope, to be very clear. Of course, if you put such systems in a vehicle, this may be part of other regulations, but not automotive type approval. Now, what is automotive type approval? That's a very important starting point. So the state of the vehicle regulation, the principles are vehicle type approval is indispensable prerequisite for all vehicles before their first registration in all countries applying type approval. That means before you can register your vehicle, you need, in European Union, need such kind of COC, certificate of conformity, and this is a prerequisite to register your vehicle. If your vehicle is not type approved, you cannot register. This is very important. It is illegal to change type approved characteristic of registered vehicles without extension of type approval or update of the registration. So you have some characteristics which are defined by the type approval, let's say the vehicle mass or the CO2 emissions, and you are not allowed to change those characteristics after registrations in general. Consequently, it's not possible to have artificial intelligence systems on a registered vehicle which bring the vehicle performance outside the scope of the type approval. Very clear. So I have a vehicle which is type approved with a specific performance, safety, environment, etc. It's not possible, it's illegal to have a vehicle which is registered and to change with artificial intelligence or not, even with other systems, to change those performance which is type approved outside the scope of the type approval. However, of course, a system can have adaptations that stay fully covered by the type approval. So the type approval can cover a certain range of performance, and of course it's fully okay to adapt the performance, but always in the type approved range. It cannot go beyond the type approved range. The principles and rules of update of software on already registered vehicles are defined in the UN Regulation 156 Software Update Management. This regulation has been adopted last year by the World Forum W29 for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations. At the UN level, this regulation entered into force in January of this year, and now different countries implement the regulation in their national or regional framework. Japan was the first country worldwide which applied a national regulation which refers to Regulation 156. The European Union works on this. So it's a DG GROW, so the colleagues from DG Connect who work on this, they prepare a delegated act to the European Framework Regulation 2018-858 for vehicle type approval in order to integrate Regulation 156, UN Regulation 156, in the whole vehicle type approval system for European vehicles, motor vehicles and their trailers. So this is the basics for vehicle type approval and for adapting things, adapting the software. Now, some examples of existing regulations, automated driving, because I think we have also here in the scope not only artificial intelligence, but also automated driving. So there's one only regulation enforced on automated driving for automated systems of level 3 and higher. That means systems where the driver can delegate the driving task to the vehicles. This is the UN Regulation 157, Automated Lane Keeping Systems. That means it's a kind of a traffic jam chauffeur system. And for those systems, we have different kinds of validations which are required. The first is really the conventional test track. That means the vehicle is driven on a test track. There are some critical maneuvers which have to be performed, and there are performance requirements for those tests. That's a very classical test. The second is a real world test drive. You know this a little bit from the emission regulations, and here it's the same. The vehicle will be driven in the real traffic on a real road, and the vehicle has to react to the real traffic and is tested by the authorities in such an environment. And the last, and I think the most important part is for the artificial intelligence, is the audit part. So there's a requirement for an audit where the vehicle manufacturer has to show the functional and operational scope and also the safety concept. That means the safety and also the fail-safe concept, the safety of the intended function. There are some ISO standards for this, which are well known in the automotive field, and this has to be shown how safety is ensured. And of course, as we cannot test all situations, simulation will also be used for this audit. And normally the use of artificial intelligence does not change the performance requirements of the regulation, and also validation of artificial intelligence is well covered by those three pillars above. To go further, the United Nations framework document, which had been already adopted in 2019 by all members of the United Nations World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulation, W29, for automated driving of level 3 and higher. And this framework document is regularly checked for necessary updates. This includes some common principles And for each principle, there are UN working groups to define the new regulation for this. So this is a list of the principles. We have part of the principles covered by the working group of functional requirements for autonomous vehicles, and where we have, of course, the system safety and fail-safe response, which is defined here with the requirements. Another one, which is also very important, validation method for automated driving, especially validation for system safety. So here, this is where artificial intelligence must also be covered, the safety concept of the automated driving system. And then there are other parts, cybersecurity software, which are already covered by the new regulation 155 on cybersecurity and 156 on software update. So this is the new framework for automated driving of level 3 and higher. And then there are some other points which are in this scope. Now, to go more in theory, vehicle design phase. The vehicle design phase will use different methods, and it may include artificial intelligence, of course, to design a vehicle system, to design a function. The vehicle type approval has to cover the entire operating range of the type approval, of course. Everything must be covered by the type approval, and check criteria and limit values can be integrated in the design to ensure safety and compliance in all cases, including when artificial intelligence has been used. That means if there are algorithms of AI in the vehicle design, which are used in the vehicle design and which make it difficult to validate the safety, it is absolutely necessary to define in the design as well check criteria and limit values that limit the function of the vehicle to ensure safety in all cases. And in no case, it will be possible to physically test the vehicle under all possible operating conditions. And this is true also without artificial intelligence. You cannot test all possible use cases. So there, you need to have a part of audit, simulation, safety concept, which covers all those parameters without testing them individually, because it's simply not possible. So this so-called multi-pillar approach, which is now in the new UN regulation and in the further framework for automated driving, normally this already covers vehicles which are designed based on artificial intelligence with those 3 pillars: the physical tests, the real-world driving test, because this is a real-world environment which is not foreseeable by the manufacturer. When the vehicle is driven on a real road, you don't know exactly the traffic conditions before. And the last and most important part is audit and simulation, where the vehicle manufacturer has to show the entire safety concept and explain that really all cases are covered. For the design of a functional architecture for automated driving, there are different steps. The first is the perception, where we have vehicle data, the sensors of the vehicle, and maybe also offboard information and driver monitoring. Maybe artificial intelligence already used at this level here for some components. Then there's a fusion of the data to see the plausibility. And this, of course, is very important for the safety concept, because some sensors may be not reliable in all cases. So we need to check if some information is not reliable, that there's sufficient redundancy. And this is part of the safety concept. Once we have a reliable sensor fusion, there is a strategy which is decided. What is the vehicle strategy, a trajectory, and then the action which controls the lateral and longitudinal vehicle performance. And artificial intelligence may be used for the design phase. However, once the vehicle is type approved, the scope of the type approved characteristics cannot change anymore unless the type approval is extended. So you can, when you design a vehicle during the design phase, use training methods, including artificial intelligence. But once you come to vehicle type approval, it will be frozen. That's very important for the validation. And how does it work in practice? So this is here a good example of the legal use of artificial intelligence in vehicle design. So we have the vehicle design phase 1, including AI. Once the design is frozen, is finished, there will be a type approval, vehicle type approval. And the first vehicle can be registered. So vehicle is registered and can be sold, is on the road with a frozen design, which is type approved. Now the field data can be used. Field data from this vehicle and also from all other vehicles which are on the road can be used to improve the design. So with new experience, with new field data, the design can be improved in a design phase 2, which can start in parallel to the first. Once the design phase 2 is finished, again, the design will be frozen. And of course, the design is always validated by humans. So there is no automatic design which has no human validation. That's very important to recall. So there's a design, the design is frozen. And then again, if the type approval is impacted by this new design, there's extension of the vehicle type approval. And finally, when the type approval is extended, new vehicles can be registered with this new design. But, and this is also new, we can even update existing vehicles with the new regulation 156 for software update. So once the new design, which has been improved, is type approved, it can be used on new vehicles. That means in the vehicle production, but it can even be retrofitted on existing vehicles in order to improve the performance. So to conclude, this is my last slide. As we have seen, the European Commission has published this proposal to regulate artificial intelligence in general. The safety requirements for motor vehicles and their trailers, they are today well defined in the existing specific regulations. And automotive regulation is to a high degree harmonized with the UN regulations. And that's very important because vehicles are not only produced for European Union, but also for other countries. And from the vehicle manufacturer's point of view and supplier's point of view, we need really harmonized requirements. That's very important because we will not adopt a vehicle design to each country. We need really, if possible, worldwide requirements. For this, the UN regulations are very important for vehicle design. And all European member states and the European Union are part of the UN 1958 agreement. It is DG GROW, represents the European Commission. So they are part of the definition of the requirements of the UN regulations. And any additional requirements to the existing regulations, which are specific to artificial intelligence or motor vehicles and trailers, should not be defined, in our opinion, on European level, but should be integrated in the specific UN regulations, if relevant. So this is very important. There's a normal process to amend those UN regulations. There are 3 meetings of W29 per year, so we can amend all UN regulations 3 times a year. That's very flexible, but we would prefer not a big bang solution that everything changes very happy, but really to study case by case for each UN regulation. Is there really a need to add specific requirements to AI, and do it at the normal process? That means DG GROW makes a proposal and then the UN regulation can be amended for this. And that's very important to avoid double regulation and to ensure harmonized rules and to keep competitiveness of the automotive sector. That's very important, that it's foreseeable what happens and that we integrate those new requirements, if necessary, in the existing well-known developments, especially for autonomous driving. And with this, I close my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Super, Kai. That was really good, very valuable oversight. And I'll certainly be picking up in the questions. I think the topic that we discussed before, field data and what that field data might be, because I think that blends nicely with the standards presentations we have coming up later. So thank you very much for that, Kai. I look forward to the discussion. And now we have Marta and Patrick from ASEA. Marta, are you there?
Good afternoon, Brian.
Super. Thank you very much for waiting patiently. And if you would like to bring up your slides.
For sure.
And then we can carry on.
So I hope you can see my screen.
It's coming.
Very good.
Okay. Yep. We have that. We're just waiting for the full screen mode.
Very good. So perfect.
Perfect.
So thank you very much, Brian, and thank you very much also to our ITU friends for inviting us, the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, to this very important event today. So my name is Marta and I am a ASEA Smart Mobility Advisor. And today I am here with my colleague, Patrick van der Smaat, the pilot of our task force, internal task force on artificial intelligence, and also director of AI research at the Volkswagen Group. So today we will talk about two topics. First of all, we would like to present to you the approach that the European vehicle manufacturers have developed on artificial intelligence in the automobile industry. So we will present to you some of the main policy recommendations that we have formulated, and also some of the major use cases that we have in the industry. Secondly, we will present to you an overview of what are the implications for the industry in regards to the newly published Draft AI Act. And in this regard, I would also like to thank the Commission for the very comprehensive presentation that we had on the AI Act, and also Kai Zastra, my colleague, for focusing and explaining a bit the type approval, which is, I think, very crucial in order to understand how our automotive products and vehicles are put on the markets and ultimately on our roads. Let's get started. So, ASIA has published a position paper that you can, of course, find online, and we have, first of all, provided policy maker with some of the recommendations in order to shape the regulatory framework around artificial intelligence. And we have also presented an overview of how AI technology is used in our industry, so along the value chain, but also in vehicles. And starting perhaps with the main policy recommendation, we can say that it is very, very important that the approach that we are developing on artificial intelligence remain balanced and sector-based. So while it is paramount, of course, that the regulatory framework ensures the highest level of legal certainty to all the stakeholders that are involved in the ecosystem, at the same time, the policy should remain enough flexible and agile in order to accommodate innovation and also preserve the competitiveness of the EU industry at large. It must be also I would say sector-based, meaning that in our case, we have already a very, very technical regulation in place, which should be also used in order to tackle the potential challenges stemming from artificial intelligence. And this, we think, that is the best way in order to, I would say, take into account the complex way in which automotive products are tested, produced, and also market. And we gladly see that the Commission has also taken this recommendation into account in the current AI Act. So, as we have said, there are already existing strict regulatory frameworks in place for the automotive industry and especially for vehicles. And we have, for instance, so as we have seen already with the previous presentation, there is type approval systems and also other regulations such as the general safety regulation, the conformity of production, and other ex post surveillance mechanisms in place in order to ensure that all the automotive products and vehicles are compliant with the maximum safety levels. And we also have, as Kai mentioned already, at international level, the UN frameworks, and we have legislation that has already been adopted, tackling certain, I would say, specific safety aspects of automated and connected vehicles. And we have, in this regard, as we have seen, the UN automated lane keeping systems regulations, and also a regulation on cybersecurity and on software updates. And these are all very important frameworks that we should take into account also in the case of artificial intelligence. And another very, I would say, important recommendation is that the approach to artificial intelligence and the regulatory framework is proportionate, and is proportionate to the level of risk of each use case or applications. And we are also grateful to have seen that the Commission have captured this concept also in the AI Act. For us, it is, I would say, essential that the new AI requirements will be included into the type approval system, and that these AI requirements will target only the high-risk AI applications, meaning those safety critical functions that are embedded in level 3 vehicles and above. So everything else which is, I would say, non-safety critical, and everything that is, I would say that is identified as a traditional software systems should fall outside the scope. And a very important point is that the work streams that we have at international and at European level that are working on this important regulation, and also that are working simultaneously on the vehicle approval, are much more synchronized than today. And moreover, coming back to the risk-based approach, of course, we support this. And we have, at the very beginning, I would say that criticized the approach that was put forward in the white paper at the beginning last year by the Commission, because it was classifying entire sectors as high risk. But now we have seen, and this is very good, that actually we are now talking about only use cases. So this is, of course, supported by vehicle manufacturers. However, there is important definitions that should still be clarified. We have seen the previous one in the white paper, as also the one that we have on the AI Act, are still too broad, in the sense that they risk to also introducing regulation for traditional software systems, which are already regulated. So we believe that a narrow definition should be actually put forward. And we have already seen some of the safety framework for automated driving, but also for vehicles in general, and how frameworks that are already very relevant in order to address the challenges that we have in terms of safety. And vehicle manufacturers are also trying to tackle ethical challenges. And here I would like to actually to give the floor to my colleague Patrick, whose work is very much focused on, I would say, making the ethical principle accessible for the industry. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Indeed, let me shortly explain that. So this was also one of the questions in the Q&A. We are looking into further regulations with respect to AI in order to look into ethical challenges such as responsibility and transparency, reliability, robustness, explainability, and so on. Very much along the work of the high-level expert group on the report of May 2019. And in that we have indeed started setting up an organization, ETAMI, together with 17 partners in Europe, including companies like Siemens and Atos and ABB and Continental and Zalando. So it's not just automotive, but it's much broader than that, which looks into creating standards and certification of those in the whole area of AI development and deployment. Next slide, Marta.
Here we go.
Yes, with respect to the technical annex of the recommendation paper. Next slide. One should be, of course, very much aware. People are in many cases thinking about autonomous driving or assisted driving when talking about AI in the automotive sector. But we must be very much aware that the use of AI is much more predominant at this very moment and will remain important in the future as well, along the whole value chain. So we're looking at ergonomics, at anomaly detection, predictive maintenance, and so on and so forth, but also in associated areas such as after sales, in the human resources, in the whole finance sector of the automotive sector, and mobility as a service. So all of these parts are indeed very important, and of course also affected by upcoming legislations, but also are very much in the purview of the ethical discussions. Next slide, Marta. Okay, next slide, yes. Of course, also in the transportation, in the automobiles, in driver-assisted systems, risk assessment systems, emergency braking, and so on. All of these also the comfort functions, infotainment, navigation, parking assistance. So many important assistance and safety functions which go beyond the direct function of autonomous driving. Next one. Slide updates are a bit slow, but the next
There is a bit
with
latency.
Yes, predictive maintenance, of course, in the aftermarket, analysis of accidents, because that's, of course, a very important input for the OEMs, as well as insurance services and so on and so forth. So this whole value chain is extremely important for the whole industry, for the OEMs. Next one, on that later on as well. In the paper, the ATSEA position paper, we are distinguishing in follow-up of the HLAC discussion between general and narrow AI. Of course, a general AI, I would say, end-to-end systems are not on the road yet, are not being used yet, are not being available today beyond in the research labs. So that's not the main focus at this very moment from a regulatory point of view, but also the learning of rational systems, again following the HLAC definition, for type-approved safety critical functions is currently not in the vehicle today, right? And that's also following with the previous presentation we had. But we have to very much look into the benefits and opportunities of AI, and that's why not just the autonomous driving, but also the whole value chain is important with respect to safety, efficiency, and environment and growth. Back to you, Marta.
Thank you very much, Patrick. But now let's move to the crux of the matter today, which is the AI Act. And let's have a look together at what are the main implications for the automotive sector. And also we will present to you some of the first reactions of the industry on this AI Act. So we have seen already from the very comprehensive presentation of the commissions that high risk, there are two categories that are identified as high-risk AI systems in the meaning of the AI Act. Firstly, we have safety components of regulated products, and these products are medical devices, machinery, and of course, motor vehicles. These are already subject to third-party assessment under the relevant sectoral regulation. And we will deep dive into the motor vehicle case in a few seconds. Then we have the second category, which encompasses standalone AI systems in certain domains. And here I have highlighted in red some of the, I would say, most relevant also for automobile manufacturers, because they might be used in some other business processes. And so these are biometric identification, categorization of natural persons, management and operation of critical infrastructure, education and vocational training, and also employment and workers management, therefore AI systems used in HR. Looking at the situation of motor vehicles and how they are captured in this draft regulation. We have seen that, and also Commission, our colleague from the Commission explained before, that safety components, high-risk safety components of motor vehicle will be temporarily, I would say, exempted from this regulation, meaning that this regulation will not be directly applicable to these systems, which are related to products covered by the older PERT legislation. And we have already heard what the older PERT legislation is. However, We also have understood that the ex-ante requirements, so the mandatory requirements that are set out in this AI Act for high-risk AI system, will have to be taken into account when adopting relevant delegated legislation under the sectoral regulation. So we are talking about the type approval regulation now. And in this regard, it's very, very relevant to look at the article number 80 of the AI Act, because this will serve to amend the regulation on the type approval, and will also delegate power to DG GROW, which is currently in charge of the type approval systems. And DG GROW so will be obliged to take into account the rules of the AI Act whenever issuing delegated acts on safety components which will have embedded AI systems. And so once the AI Act will be will come into force, of course, vehicles and vehicle manufacturing will be faced with the obligations put forward in this proposal. But there are also other AI use cases that are relevant for automobile manufacturers, and because some of them, for some of the business processes that we have, and also for some other in-vehicles applications which fall outside the scope of the type approval. So we are talking about comfort functions or voice recognition systems, etc. The requirements that are laid down in this proposal could directly apply. Some examples are here. We have high-risk AI systems in scope of the AI Act under Annex 3, such as management and operation of critical infrastructure. Under this term, we have a use case, which is AI systems intended to be used as safety components in the management and operation of road traffic. And this, I would say, would require some clarification also on Commission side on whether this could extend also to the vehicle backend infrastructure. Then, of course, AI systems used for recruitment, while vehicle manufacturers, as also many other companies are using AI also in the HR departments, and AI becomes a very important tool for reducing human bias in this process, and also for recruiting the actual competence, and therefore, of course, they will have to also to the requirements will be applicable also in this case. Then we have other AI systems which present limited risk according to the AI Act, and these are specified under Article 52. In this case, we could have some of these systems already in use, maybe in vehicles, for instance, the speech interface, and these are captured under the AI systems intended to interact with natural persons, as described by Article 52. And also, in the future, we could have in vehicles emotion recognition systems to detect driver drowsiness, or also biometric categorization systems for the recording of accident. So for these kind of use cases, then the AI Act would directly apply. But now I'll try to give you some of the, to present to you some of the first reflections that we have formulated in the industry. So the first thing that we can note is that OEMs, so vehicle manufacturers, are captured by this draft regulation as both providers of AI solutions, which are developed internally, but also as users of AI systems developed by the suppliers, which means that we will be faced with double obligations. And in some certain fields, this could kind of hinder somehow the AI adoptions, because these the high requirements that are set in the proposal together, combined with some already existing legislation such as the GPR, could lead to a situation where actually companies will refrain from deploying AI, for instance, in the HR, because of these high requirements, and thus the benefits and the positive effects of AI would be lost. As regards to the definition, as Patrick already said, we believe that the one that is set out in Annex 1 is still very broad, because it includes basically all software and could cover also traditional control algorithms and other software, any piece of software based on statistical approach. And this also risks to kind of capturing the regulation traditional software systems that are able to receive data from the surroundings and that can process this data and use this data to take a decision or perform a certain action as AI is defined. And then there will be additional regulation in place also for these already regulated systems. Another very important point for us is that the AI Act does not mention the work which is carried out at UN level, and it is still unclear how any I would say AI output that is formulated in this form could interact with the AI Act and with the sectoral regulation at the EU level. And on this point, we also remind that it is very important that in order to accommodate the compliance of a global automotive industry, the AI requirements for automotive products are harmonized at as much as possible at UN level. Then we, as regards to the sectoral approach that is taken by the Commission, we support this, of course, and we believe that this should be maintained throughout the co-decision process. And it's very important because this will ensure that automotive products are regulated through their sector-specific framework. Then maybe a couple of aspects also that require clarification as regards to motor vehicles. As the first thing is the interaction of the requirements, mandatory requirements for high-risk AI systems with the type approval. We still I believe it is a bit unclear the phrasing taken into account, which is used under Article 18. Because we believe that the requirements which are set out in the proposal should be adapted to the specific situation of motor vehicles whenever future delegated acts under the type approval will be adopted. And therefore not just simple reference would be suitable for our product. And also when we are talking about amending type approval regulations, it should be clear that only those safety relevant and also AI relevant type approval regulation will be amended, and not all of them. In terms of timeline, we believe that also it is very important for vehicle manufacturers to have to be given a suitable time frame in order to comply with the new AI requirements. Because this, I would say, this is the only way in order to consider the development cycle length of automotive products. And as regards to the definition of safety components, there are some questions that perhaps would need some clarification on, so which are actually the AI systems that can be considered high risk safety components in motor vehicle and which are not, and which ones then could fall in the scope of the AI Act because are not type approved. And the final one before giving the final word to Patrick is about the CE marking. Motor vehicles and components are already covered by the type approval in the GSR, the General Safety Regulation, therefore should be exempted. However, it is still to be clarified whether the high-risk AI systems that could possibly be deployed in vehicles in the future will need to also affix the CE marking or not. And but I'm happy to continue this conversation later on. And now I give the word to Patrick again.
Thank you, Marta. Bryn, don't worry, it's the last slide. With a few points, I go through them very quickly. The first one, I don't see the slide yet, but it's coming there. It is the requirement with respect to data, and it's required to be free of errors and complete and follow the correct probability distribution, which is something which is probably not possible in many cases, because that's exactly the algorithms that take care of that or that validate that. So the combination of the algorithm and the data, that makes sense, but the data themselves probably doesn't make sense, and free of errors is a strange or a not very practical definition. Secondly, the requirement of human oversight. Yes, it makes sense from a human point of view. On the other hand, it would of course make things like autonomous driving extremely complex, and naturally this topic has already or is already under discussion of the draft implementation of the EU proposal of driverless systems for level 4 and 5. Thirdly, cybersecurity that is addressed there is already covered by UNECE regulation. So that needs to be aligned. And finally, the access to data and the storing of data may, in some cases, if we're talking about very long time series data, for instance, it may be technically extremely challenging to impossible to follow these regulations in the utmost detail. So there needs to be, I think, a discussion on that, on where that makes sense and where that's not possible or doesn't make sense. And I think that concludes our comments.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Marta. Thank you, Patrick. Comprehensive as always. I really like the specific reference to the articles there. I think if we could ask all the panelists to join again, I think that would be great. If you wouldn't mind turning on your cameras and your audio. And we have Niels from ETSI will be joined. His camera isn't working, but he is here. And I think we may still have Amy from AVSC. Yeah, Amy's joined as well. Perfect. So probably the thorniest question then is the definition of artificial intelligence. So where we start with that. So Tatiana, if you just give us another summary as to what artificial intelligence is. I know you mentioned it was intended to be broad, and then the scope more clearly defined through the Annex 1 that could then be additionally updated as things go forward. But if you could just provide us with that overview, because obviously in the automotive sector, it feels like existing safety systems may be captured underneath this AI regulation. And my impression is that wouldn't be necessarily a positive thing at this stage, but that's open for discussion. So start with the definition, if you may.
Thank you, first of all, to Kai, Marta, for Patrick, for comprehensive discussion, more detailed than I was provided, but okay, that was complimentary. But on definitions are provided in Article 3. Indeed, it's quite broad. So you see artificial intelligence system is defined as a software. And indeed, it's quite broad, but that was intentionally left broad because we wanted, as I explained, this legislation to be future-proof. But in order not to cover everything possible and impossible, that's the combination between Article 3 and Annex, which plays a role. So not everything which automatically falls in the scope necessary also subject to requirements. So you have to fulfill both criteria. You need to fall within the definition as provided in Article 3, but you also must fall into Annex 2 or 3. So if it gives you an explanation, so it must be definition in the as provided in Article 3, yes, so which is very broad. When we have Annex 2 with techniques, but then we have specific for high risk use cases, we have specific use cases. So it's going more and more specific, So that's, I hope, partly at least replies to this question of definition.
Yeah, probably we have to look into that with that feedback. I like the definition in that it's extremely clear, right? It avoids words like intelligence or any of these undefinable things, and that makes it very, very clear. But on the other hand, any piece of software that has a parameter, like in Annex 3, the third point, and that parameter is determined by some statistical method, is included in a definition, right? And
yes, but it's even if it's in a definition, it's not necessarily still subject to obligations, you know.
yes,
so,
yes, but
in order to it to be flexible, because if we start to get into discussion what are the expert systems and how to define Excel from other systems,
no, that's clear.
So of course it's a very big discussion, and we have tried to follow it in detail, and why did we decided to kind of do this staged approach, so to say, and also why we decided to take OECD as a starting point, discussions at the OECD or agreement at the OECD, because at least it has some sort of, if not consensus, but the general agreement that it's at the time the best definition, which would be both technology neutral, but also future proof. Because also, if it takes 2 years to negotiate the legislation, then if we adopt something very detailed and specific, when it's already tomorrow outdated, if not today, So that's basically the approach. Maybe just before we move to another question, if I may, Brian, to immediate reaction to Marta and Patrick's presentation.
Yeah.
I think there is a bit of confusion. I mean, you listed a lot of points of kind of where we could improve, but I think there's generally one big misunderstanding that you see it as a weakness that we don't provide detailed provisions, for example, for automotives. But for us, it's not a weakness, it's actually a complement. So we base our coordination with this general horizontal framework and sector-specific legislation, in that case, automotive, on the complementarity principle. So AI regulations or requirements, be it type of approval related or conformity assessment procedure or anything related to compliance and supervision, we don't kind of cross with everything what exists. So we all procedures and systems and conformity bodies and type approval bodies have notified bodies at the member states where will continue to exist. The same applies with the governance system. So we are very much aware of UN-inspired and international law-inspired influence, for example, in the vehicles domain, but also in aviation domain, etc. Therefore, we did not feel it is our task, or it would be counterproductive, if we include specificities related to this specific sector already in the horizontal legislation. So basically, you should see that we provide empowerment. So Marta had correctly stated the correct articles in the text, which provide empowerments to this sectoral legislation. So put it simply to DG GROW colleagues, then who would be then tasked to take it also with discussions at the UN level and so on, to make sure that the requirements which we propose are then integrated in these legislative pieces of legislation, which would be inspired by UN, for example, yes, in that case. So this is also partly replies to Kai's question. It doesn't mean that we don't consider them, but for this specific piece of legislation, which is horizontal, we could not spell out in every detail. That's why we went for this system of specific empowerment. So the last provisions of the legislation provide specific empowerments to different pieces of legislation, and then they take this work from there, So that's the general setup. And I think that's what explain actually a number of your questions, which you put in the last slides, Marta, and also for Kai.
Yeah, but does it mean it will be DG GROW who will bring those aspects in the debate at Geneva at the UN level?
We are working closely with DG GROW. So I think also today among attendees, there must be some colleagues from DG GROW, but yes, that would be the sectors who are responsible. So sectoral people who are responsible for this matter, who would then take it up to UN level, for example. Yes, and I think there are already ongoing discussions exactly with DG GROW, and we also have the European External Action Service, who follows in Geneva and so on. So that's it's happening. So we are working together. So we want to make sure that. Automotive sector is just one of the sectors, but the similar discussions happen, like, for example, in aviation. And I bring up aviation because that's also the field which I follow. But as you know, aviation is also very much international law inspired, but also maritime equipment and other mobility areas. So, and we don't want to intervene in this because we already understand that there are already very well established, years proven structures which work. Therefore, we don't want to now say, okay, we want this and that conformity procedure, or we want this and this body to be responsible. So this is then for sectors to define.
Brian, may I react very quickly to Tatiana on this point? Thank you very much, first of all, Tatiana, for your clarification. And I just want to point it out that also our recommendation from day one was not that there should be actually specificities or article that specifies something on the automotive products in this horizontal regulation, but on the contrary, we have always supported the fact that it is the type of proven the sectoral legislation that should specify also something on the AI requirements. And the big question for us at the moment is to understand how can we actually translate the AI requirements that we have here in the AI Act also for motor vehicles and in the situation of motor vehicles. So, but I believe that in this case, so DG Grow and also the Motor Vehicle Working Group and the experts that are working on the type of proven and technical regulations that are entailed there should be, I would say, interpelled. I mean, should have a say on this ultimately. Thank you.
Tatiana, during your presentation, you mentioned conformity, surveillance, and supervision, which I think are very interesting topics, particularly kind of in relation to the work of the focus group, where we're working on how you assess these systems once they've been deployed in the field. So once they've been type approved, how can you assure their continued function is actually safe? And that's very much related to Amy's work with AVSC as well. So could you touch on that a little bit more, the conformity, surveillance, supervision, those requirements?
Maybe I can give a brief. Basically, that was also one of the questions which I tried to answer in questions and answers. I mean, our general approach, I mean, in this regulation, the generally to follow the life cycle approach. Yeah. So we want to make sure that we propose requirements, first of all, and this is perhaps different, for example, from United States. Yeah, the systems, we put a lot of emphasis on safety and compliance with safety requirements and fundamental rights before the product even enters the market. Yeah, so all these conformity assessment type approval procedures, they are before ex ante, so before the product is put on the market. But we also know, especially for complex systems as future coming autonomous vehicles, yeah, or any AI systems, complex, they are, and that's where I started with my presentation, the specific features of AI systems make them, they modify through the life process. Yeah, so even if you put the product at the moment A, you know, it's already 2 seconds later, maybe it will be different through learning capabilities, etc. Therefore, the big part of the AI this regulation is also to make sure that we have mechanism to continuously monitor that system which is already in use, which is still complies with the requirements. But this supervision and surveillance is still a matter of national or international, in some areas, authorities which are responsible for safety and compliance. Yeah, but this maybe just to complement, to have a broader picture. So of course, Artificial Intelligence Act is only one step in overall approach to regulating AI at the EU level. So this is one act. As you may have known, in addition to sectoral legislation, we also have at the end of the year or beginning of next year, for example, the Commission intends to propose also Liability Act, yeah, which will even more look into detail into the kind of at what happens, you know, even if after following all the risk requirements, etc., that the product caused certain damage to health and safety of the individual. This is not fully covered in this. It's not covered in this AI proposal, but it will be covered in another piece of legislation. But generally, the vision of the European Union that we need to cover the whole life cycle and different risks which emerge at the different levels of the life of the product.
And within the Act, you make a definition, I noticed, about serious incident. And there are specific requirements about recording data for serious incidents and the learning that needs to come from that.
Yeah, I mean, you see, we have actually Article 3 definitions is quite a few pages, and it spells out all this, what is market surveillance authority and what is the foreseeable misuse, for example. All these definitions, they actually quite embedded already in the product safety legislation. So we try to build as much as possible into the existing already case law or existing legislation. So all these terms, we have special meaning in product safety legislation, which I will not elaborate here, but generally that was one of the reasons of this legislation. We didn't want to, start from a blank page. We wanted to take good what we already have, be it in terms of existing structures, be it in terms of the concepts, and build on them. Yeah, so that's, I guess, the reply to this.
Yeah, and Amy, if you just like to touch on the type of data and the reasons for recording types of data in accidents, but also the latest work around metrics, which starts to look at safety envelopes and the potential for near-miss incidents, because that's very much related to Kai's point about field data, data that's acquired while these vehicles are in the field and how that can be fed back to improve these systems. So
yeah,
if you just touch on that'd be great.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons why we developed our best practice on data collection, was specifically for the point of lessons learned. For the vehicle manufacturers to be able to go back and look at how they're performing. So I think it applies to that surveillance and supervision aspect that Tatiana was just talking about, that even after you've proven that you're safe enough to be out on the road, everybody agrees that that continuous data collection and monitoring needs to occur, and it needs to be taken in, factored back, fed back into the existing system setup that you have.
Yeah, Kai, do you want to come in on that? Because you made some interesting points in the pre-call about cybersecurity and the way that legislation was being introduced, and then it's more horizontal now being vertical, but specifically about the data and then the updates for these software and these vehicles going forward. That would be interesting.
Yes, the UN ECE had developed those two regulations, Regulation UN 155 on cybersecurity and UN 156 on software updates. And those are two fundamental for the automotive sector. And I think what is very good here, that it's really specific regulation which is adapted to the automotive sector. And this is important for us that we get regulation for this field, cybersecurity software, but it's really harmonized worldwide. And I hope that for artificial intelligence, we will come to the same, that we will finally, if it is necessary to amend regulation which is already existing or which is under development, and for the automated driving, that it will be integrated in the UN regulations. That would be perfect for the automotive sector to stay competitiveness, to keep competitiveness, and also for vehicle manufacturers outside Europe, that they will have the same requirements. This will help a lot.
Super. Marta, I picked up on a point. It was on one of your slides, so I hope I've got this right, which was the feeling that I had when I saw the statement was that ASEA would be comfortable with the AI regulation applying to level 3 and above systems, but not necessarily level 2 or below systems. Can you just clarify that point, whether I've understood that correctly, and where you see the definition, the distinction between those? That would be interesting.
Yes, thank you, Brian, for this question. As we said, we would like to see an approach which is proportionate to the level of risk, right? So we also know that the highest is the level of autonomy in whichever systems, being a car or being something else, then the higher the requirements should be. And this is also the motivation of our statement, I would say, because with level 3 above automated vehicles, we would have maybe situations that are more critical from a safety perspective than in other systems, and then in other vehicles that are just level 1 or level 2 automation.
but mainly motivated by the fact that at those lower levels of automation, the human driver remains responsible for those
Correct.
tasks.
Yes, and that's also
human redundancy.
crucial.
Yeah. Okay. And Niels, if you're there.
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. So yeah, I just wanted to touch. Obviously, our conversations before have looked at vehicle-to-vehicle communications, but vehicle-to-infrastructure communications as well. And so that ability for AI to be used in the sort of back-end systems, maybe at a smart intersection, and then feed that data forward to vehicles on the road that might make decisions from that. How do you see that being impacted by this AI Act that's been proposed?
Yeah, so let me just start with a small comment to the previous from our colleague from Stellantis. Yes, we have the UNC regulation 155 and 156 with cybersecurity and with software update. But we also have in that domain a vertical regulation through the Radio Equipment Directive, the Article 3.3 D, E, and F, and I. And already there we see some potential conflicts, which when we from the ETSI side are trying to do the necessary standards to support the Radio Equipment Directive, we can see there are some potential conflict with the UNC regulation. And it's my clear recommendation that we take this up front for the AI and try to avoid ending in a similar situation. When it comes back to the AI and the V2V communication, the V2I communication, I think first I would say, generally speaking, what we are trying to do there is to provide the input so the AI engine actually can make its decision and work. So that is very much what we work with. However, there is one thing which goes beyond what we normally see in standards, because typically when we do a standard, we also do a test specification. Per tradition, test specifications have been based on deterministic testing. So basically you can repeat the test, get the same result. However, if you test an AI engine, it would basically learn, at least some of them would constantly learn from the input. And therefore you might get a different or slightly different result every time you test. And there's a number of questions. Should you test the equipment straight off the production line? Should it have had time to learn? How do you actually cope with testing something where the output might come from AI? So it poses a lot of questions on top of, let's say, the pure technical, providing the input to the AI for us in standardization.
Okay, super. So I think one of the points that I've raised, and we may come on to this a little bit later during Amy's session, but just for the people that are joining for the first session, one of the things that is being introduced in the UK in terms of the regulation, the highway code as it applies to human drivers, is this issue about passing distances. So what's considered safe in terms of passing a pedestrian or passing a horse or passing a cyclist. So these now become real world metrics at which safety is assessed. So as we look forward with this AI Act, how would that type of say requirement be integrated into the AI Act's framework? You know, this need to meet certain safety standards for public safety. And then how would we introduce that? Is that part of the AI Act? Is that part of the UNECE regulations? Where does that get introduced? Is that domestic regulation or is that international regulation? I think just some closing comments on that specific question, but then also any further remarks you'd like to make, and we'll start with Tatiana.
Thank you. No, I think it's very good. Sorry, I'm coughing. My voice is fading. Basically, the system, which was the first reply to the first question by Patrick, Marta, and Theo on definitions, it's very much also relates to that element. So the annexes are dynamic instruments which could be amended. So let's imagine in the near future, we will have a new regulation at the EU level related to the technical infrastructure for autonomous vehicles connection to the general road infrastructure, yes. And so there will be something forthcoming, let's say, yes. So then if it will become a legislation, then potentially with a future revision of AI Act, could potentially fall into the annex category B, if it would be old approach legislation. So that's what, just to give an example, yes. So we understand that the field is very dynamic. That's why we think with certain acts will be added as the technology develops, so as they become regulated. And there are two ways how they could be added. So exactly also as Marta explained in her slides, we have two categories. One, already legislation which sees the system or the product as a high risk, so like currently vehicles. So if it will be regulated, it will fall into this category. But on the other hand, we also see kind of only software-based systems, especially in the management and operation of critical infrastructures. We have this as a category. So now it doesn't have a lot of use cases, but for example, certain elements mentioned by Niels, for example, also, at least from my first reaction, could then potentially be added as use cases in this category. So that would fall into the second category of high risk use cases. So that's the whole build up, which we try to explain, this future-proof system that we define in the main articles of the regulation, the main parameters, which could be further defined through the annexes, and in addition through the standardization bodies activities. And I think that's the session afterwards. But as I mentioned in one of my closing slides, we are starting with procedures and negotiations with, first of all, European standardization bodies, but of course, those who work on the standards know that European standardization bodies are MIRO, for international standardization bodies, so it's very much interlinked, and this process is now starting. So AI Act is like a first step which would trigger further discussions related to requirements and standards.
Perfect, thank you. Patrick, any final remarks from yourself?
I like the last remark from you, Tatjana. So it's excellent step, I think, and I'm involved in some of the standardization issues there with respect to AI, and I think it's perfect timing. So we will see each other again there.
And Marta?
Yes, maybe I have a couple of last words. So the first thing I would say, trying to carefully balance the premature regulation with innovation. Then we should ensure the consistency, again, as we already pointed out, with the existing sectoral regulatory framework. So using also the procedures that we have in place, and avoid, I would say, that the requirements that we have are duplicated. Further develop also industry-led initiatives and also standards, code of conduct, as Patrick said, and harmonization of the AI requirements at global level, because we have a global automotive industry, and we would like to have also global standards. Put some emphasis also on the benefits of artificial intelligence, because this is very much important also to have a greater public trust in automation, transport automation. Yeah, I would say that's it.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Kai, final closing remark from you for this session.
Thank you, Glenn. So for me, I think it's very good to have such kind of exchange between the rule makers and industry. That's very useful. And I think what is very important for the EU regulation to have a good collaboration between DG Connect and DG Grow to identify, is there a need to amend existing regulation for the automotive sector? And if yes, use a classical procedure to update UN regulations where it is necessary, where it is relevant. So I think this is really key for the future.
Perfect. Well, it looks like we have an interesting few years ahead of us. It's something that I really appreciate all of you joining us today, as well for the participants. We'll take a short break now, so just a 10-minute comfort break, and then we'll come back with Amy and Niels, and we'll go into a little bit more detail around the standards that might support this, the AI Act and the implementation and the global regulation. But for our speakers in the first session, thank you very much again. fascinating discussion. Really enjoyed that. And I'll see you again in 10 minutes time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Brent.
very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Brian. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
friends. Bye.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back for session 2 of this webinar. I hope you agree that the first session was fascinating, and 10 minutes for a break is too short to do anything of meaning. But I'm looking forward to this next session. We have Amy from AVSC, we have Niels from ETSI, and to avoid any further delay, I suggest we start with Amy, if you're able to bring up your slides,
Sure
and then we
thing.
can have a Q&A at the end of both presentations as well.
Okay, attempting to share. Can
Okay,
you see them?
we
Big
have
question.
we have you full screen.
Great.
That's perfect. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the introduction. Again, my name is Amy Chu. I'm the director of the Automated Vehicle Safety Consortium, or AVSC for short. This consortium was started 2 years ago now. We're 2 years old. And I'll tell you a little bit about the consortium in a bit, but just wanted to share with you a couple of the topics that I think are relevant for this session, and 2 of the best practices that we've published. One around data collection, which I believe you heard about in this group maybe a while ago, sometime last year when we first released it, but then also our latest best practice, which has to do with metrics and methods. So I'm going to advance my slides. Sometimes it's a little slow. Okay. So basically I'll tell you about, who is the AVSC, how we work, give you a little background there, a refresher if you already know a little bit about us, how we're accelerating standards development. That's the plan. The 2 best practices that were published in September of last year, as well as March of this year. And then talk about future collaboration and sort of our hopes for contributing to this great work that's being done all over the world. So our member team is shown right here. So our members meet 2 or more of the following categories. They develop or test ADS technology, automated driving system technology. They integrate into vehicle platforms, and they also have plans for deployment for fleet-owned vehicles. And so these are our core members showing up here on the screen. It's purposely small so that we can come to agreement. So the idea behind the consortium, or our mission, is to quickly establish safety principles, common terminology, and best practices. And the whole point is to lead to standards, maybe take some of the topics that are gaps in the industry or in the regulation space right now, talk through it from a industry perspective on how to practically implement these best practices. And then, really a big thing for us is to engender public confidence and trust in the safe operation of SAE level 4 and level 5 passenger vehicles. So this is, we're trying to attack a whole bunch of things at once, but we're doing it from an industry perspective, taking the myriad of ADS research projects, committees, lots of things going on, discussing in this area, then taking that expert opinion from our members, talking through some of, where we see the gaps, where we see things need to be discussed further. Then we'll take these forward into global voluntary technical standards, and with the ultimate goal of increasing ADS safety. So how we work, probably the first and most important thing I like to point out is that we're technology neutral. And so because our members are representing their companies and what their companies do, we do not talk about how we're going to be implementing these best practices. We talk about what needs to be implemented though. And so each company is coming from their own perspective, not sharing the secret sauce, not divulging any trade secrets, but really talking about what are the things that we all need to come to common ground on. And then we leave the how to each organization to determine. So we're very careful about this. The other key point is that what we do is meant to be complementary. So not to take the place of other standards work that's going on, but to complement it, to seek out, and we show the puzzle pieces here because we're looking for those gaps. We're looking for those areas where maybe further conversation needs to happen, leveraging the good work of others, complementing the work of others, really just trying to drive the safety forward in the automated vehicle space. Our members share a common interest. We're sharing current practices, best practices in safety that all the companies are working through right now. And there are some times that we have challenges in coming to that consensus. So again, our goal is to have 100% consensus from our members on what we're going to be publishing as safety best practices. But sometimes there's issues there. And so we'll talk about those challenges as well. And again, I mentioned in the previous slide that the acceleration of standards is key. So once we have our best practices published, we will walk them into different global SDO organizations. They're all accessible for free on our website. And I'll share this presentation with you after, it should be posted after the session so that you can go through and feel free to download and view any of our best practices that are out there. This slide here gives you an idea of sort of how that works. So as I mentioned, we have a best practice that we publish. We identify different stakeholders that might be interested in that topic. This could be in the form of external labs. This could be standards organizations, state and local IOOs, so different conferences, panels. We're really just trying to spread the word on what we believe are the important topics that should be discussed. On SAE specific documents, we can walk those into committees and have the individual subject matter experts take a look at it. Discuss it in greater detail and then come out with what you may be familiar with from SAE International, the J standards. And so there's lots of activities that we try to promote the work we're doing and then, receive feedback from those organizations as well. So this just shows a snapshot of all the best practices that we've released to date, with our latest being the metrics and methods for assessing safety performance that was just released in March of this year. Along the bottom, you'll see some of the work that we've done with the SAE committees, two of which of our best practices have been taken in by the committees. So the 3018 was revised within 1 year of our best practice publishing. And then similarly, the SAE J3197, I believe that's still underway as being voted in, but there was a great discussion on that data collection best practice that I'll go over today. So just to kind of show some of the success stories and also, how we're looking at these things, that we want these best practices that are listed across the top here to eventually make their way and hopefully quickly make their way into standards development. Okay, so I'll go through the data collection details. There's a lot on the slides, a lot to absorb, but in summary, the data collection best practice, which was released last September, want to talk about why we did that, and I think we touched on this in the question and answer session that we just went through. That data recording is important not only for crash reconstruction, but for performance investigation, event analysis. And the whole idea is to take those lessons learned and bring them back to improve safety as we're going. The data recording needs are evolving as we're changing the technology, and the vehicle itself, or the automated driving system itself, takes on the dynamic driving task. It has to perceive the environment. It handles the vehicle motion control. These are things that used to be performed by the human driver, and now they're being taken on by the AI in the vehicle. So it's really important for us to capture these things as we're going through. And then the current definition of impact based on triggers is no longer sufficient to capture collisions that were traditionally detected by humans. So there's different styles, and I'll get to the definition of event. That was something that we tackled in this best practice as well. So we're addressing common data collection practices for level 4 and level 5 AVs. We want to complement the current standards that are out there already. So the SAE J1698 and the J3197 were already out there before AVSC started. However, there are areas where we were able to clarify maybe some areas specific to the level 4 and level 5 vehicles. So we provide some definitions and the practical implementations for data prioritization, retrievability, survivability, and so forth. So the definition of event, quickly, the event defined as a collision or a collision-like situation. So basically, our members felt it was important to make sure that there is a reason for collecting the data that is not just, an accident happened or a crash happened, so then I'm going to look at what happened. We know that there has to be this proactive type of reporting. And so that was covered in the document. And then the triggering, it is consistent with the existing standards that are out there. So deployment of a restraint, such as an airbag, change in velocity, any event that causes a failure that result in some form of a fallback. There's a number of events that would occur that would tell the data recorder that needs to be triggered. Here I'm just summarizing the different data elements. So 39 total were recommended. And again, you can download the document and check those out. I'll provide a quick summary of them here. 14, we created new data elements that were not in those standards. And then 25 of them were identified from previous standards. And so this just goes through the breakdown of what those were. And here, there's essentially 3 categories that we identified. And again, this will be available for you. Again, all of these are inside the best practice, but under vehicle control, essentially what the ADS did, what did the vehicle do? And so capturing the different actions there. And we did specify which ones were sort of adapted from existing standards and which ones are new. Saliency, what did the ADS think was important? So this is something that, as we're thinking in terms of automated vehicles and the AI taking over the driving task, making sure that certain things are triggered. And so there's some examples here of what those items are. And then finally, what the sensor saw, or maybe some general parameters that should be represented in terms of data collection. And so these are the examples there. So again, a lot to cover, and I purposely went through that quickly because I know that might have been something that you handled at a previous meeting, but did want to spend a little bit more time on the latest best practice that we just released on March 25th, which is metrics and methods for assessing safety performance. So why are we doing this one, or why have we done this one? It's pretty straightforward too. And I think that sometimes we don't recognize the need for credible, practicable, and consistent ways to measure this performance. So again, going back to our original mission, where establishing public trust and confidence is also a big part of what we're doing. So these metrics documents are, again, not meant to take the place of standards or any specific technical requirements that need to happen or regulation, but really to focus on the basics, the foundation. How do we talk about these things? Are we speaking the same language? And so that's really important for this one. There's lots of work going on. So several ways have been put forward, but they're still not widely adopted, and that's expected. I think some of the previous presenters were saying, it could be counterproductive to be too specific at this point. I agree with that. I think that, we really have to address this complex task step by step and build the foundation from the ground up. So measuring safety outcomes is complex. It does require considerable time and exposure to really to achieve the statistical significance. Still early for me yet. But basically, there are other metrics that you can capture along the way. So again, not waiting for a crash to happen, but, looking at certain metrics as predictive indicators. And so what did we do? We came up with a foundational set, a very short list of system level metrics that are intended for use in combination with other metrics. So to be clear, these metrics are not to be taken by themselves and say, oh, if you collect these things, then you're safe. That's not the intent. The intent is that these are the baseline, these are the foundational level, and they should be combined with other metrics. And as the technology evolves, that will continue. You know, again, I already mentioned the predictive indicators, so how to assess things in the near term as opposed to just the safety outcomes in the long term. So we'll get into that a little bit in the next slides. So we do have, you know, a straightforward process that's recommended for providing evidence of safety performance. And so this was something that our members agreed on, basically beginning with your goals and assessing performance in terms of your ODD, applying certain analysis techniques, and then, you know, making sure that that feeds back into your metrics development. So it's a continuous process. And the list of metrics in summary are here. And again, they're straightforward. There's the two on the top are crashes and compliance with traffic regulations, which are safety outcome based. And then the predictive metrics, which are shown here, are really meant to be that feedback loop. So when we look at it in terms of, you know, the way that the metrics are being monitored and fed back, it all comes down to what are your safety goals? What can you measure in the near to midterm, maybe in testing even, and then as the outcomes are collected, they take much longer to collect, but as they're collected, they can feed back into those predictive measures. And so it's always meant to be a continuous loop, which we talked about earlier. So a little bit more detail on the recommended safety outcomes. One of the main reasons for these two that were chosen is that these are applicable for current driver vehicles, so non-automated vehicles. These are things that can be collected and correlated to existing data that's already out there. It could be collected for both reported and non-reported crashes or even near misses. And so these are the defined safety outcomes that we think are important to, you know, basically stand as the outcomes here. And then, of course, the predictive metrics have a big role here, and that is number one, they should be used. So we're not just waiting for the outcomes to happen. You know, definitely recognizing that there's a need. And then, what are those main foundational metrics? Well, the maintaining of a safety envelope, the longitudinal and lateral distance around the vehicle is important. Exhibiting contextually safe vehicle motion control. So the acceleration that's happening with the vehicle, the jerk that's happening with the vehicle, you know, and again, these can correlate to human driving as well, because we do this when we're driving. When I learned to drive, I was taught, you know, defensive driving or making sure that I allow enough space. If you see someone on the road that's driving erratically, that might indicate that they're unsafe. So these are things that we already do. Object and event detection and response, OEDR reaction time. This is something that I've seen in other metrics documents as well. It's very important. And that's something that is covered in the data collection document as well. So again, helping to provide advanced indication is the key on these, and based on sufficient data, gives us higher confidence, and it can be assessed using various methods. So when we talk about the methods, that was another reason why these particular metrics were chosen, is that they can be applied across the entire development cycle. They can be done in, or they can be captured in simulation and then brought into track testing as well as on-road testing, and then be correlated that way. We didn't get into the how that's done, because again, that's goes against, you know, kind of what we follow in the AVSC, but all members agree that, you know, these are the important and key criteria for bringing in these metrics. And so even in post-deployment monitoring, these metrics can continue to be used and correlated. So that's really important. So in the document as well, we go into a little bit more detail about how to analyze the data factoring, exposure, segmentation, normalization, and statistical confidence in the measurements. So establishing data sources and collection, informed deployment that can be used for post-deployment reference as well, making sure that whatever data you're correlating with can be verified. The thresholds, this is something that will vary based on company, and it should be set to improve around a matched baseline, aggregate human driver safety performance within the same ODD. There's various ways that thresholds can be determined and collected. Analysis and context. Without the right context, any safety metric has little meaning. So we do note this as a really important aspect as well. So again, just driving home the point that ADS manufacturers and developers should really utilize the results of several metrics. These we consider the foundational level, but there are other elements that would need to be used in conjunction with these. So in closing, I just wanted to go through, our intentions here in future collaboration with AVSC. One of the reasons, and thank you for inviting me to speak here and kind of give you a glimpse into what we're doing, but we want to continue that awareness. We want to continue that collaboration, information exchange, coordinating with all the various efforts that are going on in industry, and then really take it in from an industry perspective. How are the industry thought leaders thinking about this? How are they planning to move forward? And it's another step in this giant journey that we all have to go on together. So I appreciate the time and thank you for having me. Feel free to reach out at any time if you have any questions, or look forward to the fruitful discussion later on.
Excellent. Really appreciate that, Amy. And it's great to see the work AVSC have done. A lot of what you've been discussing there really aligns closely with the work of the focus group. So the more that we can take your work and use that to define some of the detailed standards work that we're doing, the better in my mind. So really appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you.
And then I think we'll follow on with Niels, and then we'll come back for some questions at the end. So Niels, if you have your presentation available.
Yes, let me see if I can figure out how to share.
Super. So for context, obviously, we need data for the automated driving system itself to make its own decisions. Some of what Amy's been talking about is data that's required for metrics to assess performance. But very similar data is then also needed for cooperative connected part of automated driving. And therefore, that's why we've invited Niels along today, just to show the similarities between all these data elements that might be required. So Niels, over to you.
Yes, I hope you can see the presentation.
Yeah, we can see the presentation, and we can see you on screen as well. You've fixed your camera.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I will present the work. So first, I'm the chairman of HCTC ITS, and I'm also the general manager of the Car-to-Car Communication Consortium. So I will present some work done in both places here. So first, I will go into what is collective perception, tell a bit on what has been done in ETSI on that, and then a little about the study we have performed in relation to that in the Car-to-Car Communication Consortium. But maybe before I start, let me try to frame what we are doing here when it comes to cooperative ITS. So we are talking about automated driving, but I like to see the task we have in order to enable automated driving the same way as if you imagine sitting inside a car with all the windows blinded. Then somehow you need to get all the information into that vehicle which the driver normally would be able to see out of the windows. Yes, you have a radar, you have a lidar, you have cameras, and we have the communication channels. So the task is basically to establish or provide all that information which normally is available to the driver to the inside of the car, so the AI actually can perform a task similar to that of the driver. So that's the basic task of that. So if we look first to what is collective perception, I would like to say to take the first point here, being that we are, let me just get a pointer, that at the moment we are in this what we call awareness driving. So with awareness driving, basically everybody share the information they have about themselves. So in simple terms, if you are a vehicle, you tell, I'm at this position, my heading is this, and my speed is this. Then we can add if the car is broken down, etc. So this is the first phase. Then what we have, what we call sensing driving, is basically you share information about the environment, and then in the last step towards the fully automated driving, we start to have cooperation, so we introduce negotiation and so on. So let me see. Yeah. So the cooperative or the collective perception service belongs to this sensing driving. So let me go into explain what is that. So it's basically, if you look at this figure here, we have the vehicles here. So the idea is that we should not only tell about ourselves, we should also provide information about what the sensors are seeing. So what you can see in the figure is that we have the blue car, this one, that might not yet be equipped, but the white car can see that one, but the red might not see it. So that could actually receive the information from the white car. Similar, if we add pedestrians and bicyclists, they might be visible to the other cars or to the infrastructure. So we can basically share that information. So that is what the service is about. It is basically to share observations, and typically that would be observations from sensors on vehicles, sensors in the infrastructure, etc. ETSI have a TR describing this in more detail and is working on doing so the technical report on this, and is currently working on finalizing the detailed technical specification for it. So let's move on. What can you use that for? So here's just a quick example here. You're driving behind a lorry, you want to overtake, you cannot see in front of the lorry, but if the lorry was actually sharing what it was seeing, you would be aware that there's upcoming traffic in the opposite direction, and it might be a bad idea to overtake. I think we just discussed here the same thing here. You can use it to warn about vulnerable road users, in this case pedestrians, etc. So what is ETSI doing in this? I think I've explained to a large degree what it's all about. It is basically to share information about objects. So on one hand, it seems quite simple. Yes, you should say that there is a pedestrian, there is a bicyclist, etc. But it's all a question of quality of the object. So it's not only what it is, it's also a question of where it is and the freshness of the data. So let me give some example of what we are trying to put in here. Is that we have a big message in that we have two variants of it. One saying if it is like the vehicle who's reporting, another one if it's infrastructure who is reporting. So we have a message defined for that. Then within that message, we have sensor information in terms of how do the sensors work? Is it an omnidirectional sensor? Is different types of sensors? What is their field of view? So we can describe what the sensors are doing. And then also what is the view it can see. As you can see, the red objects here, they would basically block, so the sensor would not be able to see what is in these beige areas out here. So that is also a part of the description of the sensors. So what is the shape of the view of the sensor, and also is the obstacles in this. Then there is information about the detected object, where it is, what is its distance, where is the angle, things like this. It's basically a 3D representation. So already to do this, you might use your AI in order to basically get to this. But the purpose here is basically to provide a well-defined object, which we can then share with other ones, so the other participants in the traffic scenario, so they are aware what is out there, and let's say the AI for automated driving can use that as an input. Of course, we need to have quality, etc., of that information in order to really use that. And it is also important that the receiver understand what is the capability of that sensor. So if the guy reporting sees only one object but have a limited range, yes, there might be additional objects out here outside the range. Then we can have some additional things about the spacing. We might also have different confidence of what the sensor detects depending on distance. So you might have different confidence levels, etc. Now it starts to be complicated. I just included that for those who want to go in detail afterwards. So now we have defined the object, we have defined how to report it, etc. But or what to report. Then the question is, how often should we send this? Because we also have limitations of radio channels, etc. So we are basically trying to look into specifying some rules on how best to do that. So I won't go into the detail. What is called DCC here is basically a mechanism to protect against overload of the radio channel, etc., which then would impact how often we send these messages. I won't go too much into the rules, but they're basically defined a number of rules for generation. One thing which is perhaps very interesting is that now all the figures I had, there was only one vehicle detecting the object, but of course there is in a real life scenarios there might be multiple entities which detect the same object, and therefore we would need some mechanisms to basically try to minimize the repetition, because to be told by the traffic light and 10 vehicles that there is a pedestrian at the same location might not necessarily be the optimal way of doing things. So we are basically been looking into different mechanisms of reduce the redundancy of the information. Of course, normally we would say redundancy is good, because if you have two vehicles reporting the same thing, it's more likely that there is something there than if it's only one vehicle. But of course, we also, since we use communication channels, we also have to ensure that we have sufficient capacity, so we don't use all the capacity to report the same pedestrian, and therefore cannot report other objects. So we are looking into those things as well in the standard. So this is what is in the standard. Then and the work being performed in ETSI. So what what we have done in the car-to-car communication consortium is basically to perform a study on how best to define the object quality. So of course all of this is nice, but we need the receiver. We need to have a similar quality of the object, irrespective of who is reporting it, irrespective of what brand of car or infrastructure, etc., who detect and report the object. We basically need to have the same understanding of the object, not only that it's a pedestrian, but the quality, the freshness of the information, etc. So then in car-to-car, we performed a study on how to define the object, both in terms of what are the objects, but also the qualities of the objects. So as just said, the key purpose is really to define the quality of the object, and there's a number of technical terms here, but basically what we did was a literature review. We did simulations of different ways of defining the objects, having basically a metric for the confidence of the objects, and then of course the outcome of this is basically to put that back into the as a contribution into the ETSI standardization. For those interested, you would find the actual detailed study. You would find it at this link. So the key here for us is really for the CPM is the accuracy. So how closely is what we detect to the reference specification, and then the confidence is basically a quantification of how sure are we really that that what we detected actually exists. And of course, it might have been detected by several sensors. You might have seen it before, so you keep doing like that. So those are let's say the key parameters for this. We have looked at different ways of accuracy. So we basically have also for that we looked at different ways of doing that, and of course, as I said before, one of our problems is that we are communicating this, so we basically have somehow to compress the data, and then we have looked on is the different ways of compressing this. If you try to scale it, what is the impact or degradation of let's say the information? All of this done. This is for the mathematicians, but the main outcome is basically that we have found a way of doing that representation. We have a correlation matrix, which is basically how well does it correlate to what we want to have, and then we have basically a truncated version which we can send in the message. For the confidence, we are basically looking again on different methods. So we basically ended up that we are using a moving average, to do that, and that is what we are putting in. It is perhaps important to say that the object confidence is not necessarily what the receiver would use directly in his sensor fusion. So we have to remember that the receiver would use the information they get from their radar, LiDAR cameras, maybe from other participants in traffic sending corporate collective perception messages. However, they might do some pre-filtering on this before they put that into to the sensor fusion. The objective here is basically to ensure that when you receive something that it's well defined, this is an object, and there are let's say a well-defined indication of what is the accuracy and the confidence of what you receive. So that is the purpose of that. So I've been very quickly through this. Brian asked me to use this as a service. Of course, you would receive other information. As I said, there is the basic cooperative awareness, where the vehicle tells where information about itself, etc. But all of that is basically input together with the sensors in the vehicles, sensors in the infrastructure, to the AI that will perform the driving function. So with that, I think I'm open for question. You would find in the slide deck, just for information, you would find links, so you can find the papers from the Car-to-Car consortium, the ETSI ones. I think it's normally quite simple, and my contact details are at the end as well. So I know we were a little behind schedule, so I tried to rush a bit. So I hope I'm within the time schedule.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Niels. I really appreciate that. And if it's okay, would you mind staying on for like 5-10 minutes just to answer any questions that come up before we close?
I can do that, no problem.
Yeah, super. I really appreciate that. So I think it was interesting. Obviously, Amy, we started with the work of AVSC, which tries to set some high level, as you described, the what, and not necessarily the how. Mm-hmm. And then we go a little bit lower when we start to look at the ETSI specification, because it starts to define the how this information has to be shared between the vehicles. So I think it's good that we have different levels of standards and that people understand that. I think what's interesting for me is this idea of confidence within the perception system. You know, how confident are you that the object that you've detected actually exists? And I think obviously the Elaine Herzberg fatality and the work that NTSB did in looking at that, the identification of Elaine Herzberg and tracking her as an object over time actually became a critical factor in evaluating the safety of that system. So is there anything specific within the best practices that you have that look at that, the sort of confidence levels within the object detection? I know OEDR and reaction time was mentioned, but is there anything else more specific on that?
Not necessarily. So, you know, but I will say that is definitely something that's been discussed, and really more so in some of the future best practices that we have in the works right now. So something you might see released later in the year about not specifically how that is done, but why that's important, what reasons, you know, or what kind of challenges would be faced in doing that type of classification or lack thereof. And so, yeah, it's not anything that we would necessarily be specific about how it gets done, but you're right, like having the what identified and why that's important is certainly under discussion.
Yeah, and Niels, I think one of the questions I saw raised was about the reference frame for the data about the objects, whether it's vehicle reference frame or whether it's then a global coordinate system. But my understanding is it needs to become global in order for you to have vehicles and infrastructure sharing data between them.
Yes, so of course, there's two elements here. There is the encoding, whether you encode relative to the position of the vehicle, which is known from the other one, but you are right, or you directly encode the absolute position. The importance is that you are able to have the absolute position here. What also have to be said here is, in reality, as I said in the start, all we are trying to do, it might sound very simple, is basically to digitize the information which somehow already is out there available in the analog world.
Yeah.
So it can be processed by the automated driving function. And of course, I've only touched on the technical aspect of this. Other things are that actually sharing that kind of data, there's a lot of other regulation than the AI regulation we have to take into account, like privacy regulations, etc., which sometimes surprises people because they say, yes, but you can see my tail light, you can see my indicator light, and by the way, I have a number plate. What is then the problem of digitizing that information? But the regulation is very different the moment we have it as digital information compared to what is just visible in the analog world, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it was one of the points I didn't raise earlier, actually, that the classification of AI as a product becomes really interesting, because it's been debated whether software is actually a product for quite a number of years now. So in terms of product liability, so it seems like the introduction of AI, the AI Act, classifies AI software, therefore, as a product, which is an interesting point. I think
I would like to add one thing too. There just to point out, in case anyone hasn't seen, but there is an SAE document that was released about a year ago. It's the J3216, which talks about taxonomy and definitions for cooperative driving automation. So maybe that gives a little more insight into that topic as well.
Yes, super. And I think one of the things, Amy, is it's really interesting when you start to talk to developers, and certainly something we're conscious of in the focus group, is the approaches to creating the data can be very different, and the approaches to using that data within their pipeline to then create the outputs of the vehicle can also be very different.
Correct.
So, you know, one of the things that we've been looking at within the ETSI world, to get cooperative, you have to be able to get to that level of a 3D representation of the environment. So the idea of having a digital twin, effectively, and that digital twin is the base requirement for doing anything connected and cooperative. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things at the moment that we say within the automated driving industry, it's not defined that they will produce a 3D world representation. And I know some developers don't explicitly require that for the way that they drive, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's something I think that industry will need to address as we go forward. And it goes back to that point about explainability and building of public trust. Yep. And so one of the things we highlighted with the Molly problem was this need to explain, did you see, you know, for the parents, for example, of Molly, who was hit by an unoccupied self-driving vehicle, did you see my daughter? At what point did you see my daughter? At what point did you think she was a risk? And what action did you take to avoid that collision? And they're very natural things that a family would want to know, therefore a prosecutor would want to know. And having that data requires really a recording of that 3D world information, and then the actions that the vehicle took within that environment. So it's certainly the best practices are a huge step in that direction. Mm-hmm. And I think there's definitely a little bit more that we need to do, as you say, around the specifics of how that should be done rather than the what should be done.
Right. And that's the tough part too, because, you know, how do you get to that point without talking specifics? It can be really difficult. And so I think, you know, what we keep coming back to is focusing on that baseline, focusing on that foundation. Where do we start? And then what can we build off of from there? So, you know, I think we have to go in with the expectation that we're not going to know everything all at once, but, you know, we will continue to build on this. And the fact that we have collaboration in the industry and outside of the industry doing this is really important. So we just have to keep doing that and keep building.
Yeah, I think within the focus group, we talk about the data as being kind of your starting point, because without the data, you can't do your metrics, and without the metrics, you can't then set thresholds. So
right.
What we've been working on with ETSI is defining, well, what could that common data standard be? You know, that if it's published or made available within the automated driving system, it can be used for cooperative driving, but it can also be used for safety assessment, and almost independent safety assessment. So the example I raised earlier about the sort of passing distances to pedestrians or cyclists, well, if it's adopted within the highway code, then it becomes kind of a regulatory requirement. Now, so at that point, it's not really for the developers to set the thresholds for what a safe passing distance is, because it's already defined that you need to be, if you're 30 miles an hour, 1.5 meters away, or above that, you need to be 2 meters away. What the regulators then want to know is how often are those safe passing distances violated? So not necessarily in the simulation and the testing, which can be done before release, but actually in the real world, how often are these metrics violated? And I think that's what becomes really interesting about your work, is how it can be extended and blended with the requirements from regulators. But I see the data as common. You know, you need the same to assess the metrics, whether it's self-assessment or whether it's regulators. So and that's what we're working towards.
Got to work toward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But one question with that is also that one of the real challenges we have at the moment, for instance, with pedestrians, and for your case, the same, is that today, generally the positioning, if you just use a traditional positioning system, there's no way we can tell if people is on the pavement or in the middle of the street. Yes, with the collective perception service, we probably can do that much better. But it's also a question when you have a regulation saying your passing distance is 1.5 meters. Where is the tolerance? Has the tolerance, if you have a position accuracy of plus minus 1/4 meter, does that mean that you have basically to take two, in the worst case, you are 0.5 meter wrong because you have a 1/4 meter on both devices? Do you, in order to guarantee the traffic regulation, do you always in your algorithm have to calculate 2 meters? So even in the worst case on your accuracies, you would still fulfill the legislation? Or is it like you do when we discuss radio parameters, we normally have a shared risk. So is the tolerance given 50/50, or how do we cope with these things? Because yes, we do this, we aim of being exact, but of course we would never be within a millimeter of precision.
Yeah, and I think Niels, for me, it also goes back to a little bit where Amy is talking about outcomes, but the passing distance is something that could be measured after the fact. Mm-hmm. So that how accurately you measure that is still dependent upon the software and also the sensors. But for me, it becomes something that if you're not using it in the decision making, you're not using it for prediction, you're using it just for assessment of safety, you can then go back and capture that as a leading metric. And then you can start to analyze, okay, but why did you end up coming close? And I think that goes back to it becomes a triggering value. Yeah. Yeah. So if you've passed within, 0.5 meter of a pedestrian, that becomes a trigger that you want to record. And then you go back and say, okay, but why did that happen? Was that an issue with the sensor calibration, or was that an issue with the deviation that you have from the norm on the sensor? So I think those things are important. It's those lessons that need to be learned and the triggers you need to capture that we're really focusing on at the moment.
Yeah. So.
Excellent. I mean, if there are any other questions from the floor, I think Jorit had I'm not sure if it was a question or a comment. I think it's more of a comment, so thank you very much for that, Jorit. Walter had a comment on passing distance. Yeah, avoidance maneuvers. That's fine. Again, what we're looking at is tracking that behavior. So again, the 3 levels that you look at, Amy, within AVSC, about what the vehicle did is also then important when you're looking at, okay, was it the correct response?
That's right.
Was it the right action that was taken for the risk that was presented? And I think when you discuss the point of saliency within the focus group, we tend to talk about kind of risk. So risk that's attached to a particular object. So it's a little bit more focused on, of all the objects you can see, which are the ones you need to pay most attention to because they pose the most risk for a potential collision within the environment. So, but I think, again, the terminology is very similar. So I think we could align very well on that. So, excellent. Well, I think if there's any final closing comments, Amy, that you want to make?
Just one. Let's keep working together. Let's keep the questions coming. Let's keep the discussion happening, because that's the only way we're going to ensure that everyone is safe on the roads as we're developing this technology, as it's evolving. So I'm really thankful to have been here today as your guest, and let's keep moving forward.
I really appreciate that. Niels?
Yeah, my recommendation is, as you might expect, let's try to keep as much standardized as possible of the information exchange. It makes it so much easier to deploy the systems, and also to discuss with the regulator if we have a common reference.
Perfect. And with that, I'd like to hand back over to Stefano to close the session. But thanks to all of our panelists, all of our participants, all of the people in the audience that have joined today for your questions and insights. I really appreciate that. Stefano, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian, for having moderated today, especially to you, and also for helping organizing this AI for Good webinar on AI policy standards and metrics for automated driving safety. We received many positive comments by the attendees, from the attendees, that found this webinar very, very informative. So big thank also to our panelists that joined in session 1 and session 2, and to all the participants for making this as a very interesting discussion. We invite you all to explore the work of the ITU focus group on AI for autonomous and assisted driving, and join its meeting, which will happen tomorrow from 13 to 16 CEST, so Geneva time, like today. And please note that all the focus group meetings are open to all. And if you need any help to join our meeting tomorrow, do not hesitate to contact us. You find the contacts on the chat. We also encourage you to check the AI for Good program online to see more sessions that might be of interest to you. For example, tomorrow, 3 of June, we have another session that will be addressing the dark side of AI. This is in partnership with UNESCO. And my colleagues are also passing the link on the chat for the webinar of tomorrow. I encourage you to join. With that, we have reached the end of this webinar, and would like once again to thank everyone involved, our panelists, our participants, our partners, sponsors, and the co-convener, which is Switzerland. This is Stefano Polidori from the ITU. Thank you very much for joining today, and I hope to see you all tomorrow.
Selector, rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector. Selector, rewind selector, rewind Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector.